is that you can try really hard to set the agenda and still fail. And it's one of the things that I like about sports is that at the end of the day, there is a specific winner and loser. The reality can encroach on whether the agenda was correct. And that's rare in this era of misinformation where, politicians or whoever can try to spin things any way they want, and then something happens and people will still find ways to spin it a certain way. The Bruins try very hard to control the agenda. They have all of their arms that they can use to try to say Tyler Sagan and Bruce Cassidy and Jim Montgomery and Brad Marchand were all these different things. But at the end of the day, the rings are the rings. And Brad Marchand is the most recent guy to benefit from that. To say, okay, you know what? My name's going to kind of be sullied on the way out of town, and things are not going to end well. But I still get to hoist the cup. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what sort of thing is going to be on your television show or social media. I get the ring. Hello, Bruce. Let's join this club. Let's go out on the yacht together and lift our cups together. Just wanted to really quickly acknowledge Brad Marchand joining that group. Go Rats. Keagan, I'm not sure. I know that you're not a giant hockey guy. So I'll start with Logan. Logan, what was your feeling as a Bruins observer watching that result of that game on Tuesday night?
I was thrilled for him. The guy deserves it. Like you know, it it is absurd how things ultimately flamed out at the end, and we haven't even really talked about how that whole story unfolded with beginning with Rich Keefe saying, "Hey, it's like a Brad Marchand trade could be on the table," and every other Bruins person shooting that down, only for it to come to pass 6 weeks later. Um, but no, I mean, it made as a practical matter, it really made no sense for the Bruins to keep him. I do think that from a hockey standpoint, it raises concerns about long-term IR again, and the fact that these teams can play the postseason with teams that are 10 million over the cap or whatever. But you know, as a personal matter, it's one of those things where it's like, I wish that Brett Marchand got a chance to win it again with the Bruins, but he probably wasn't the way that this team was going. Like, they had a few opportunities within the last 3 years. I do believe that Florida was where he wanted to go. I think that is a funny way to kind of stick it to the Bruins and be like, no, like, this is the destination. I've watched this team pants us every year in the postseason. And so in the same way, like, I ultimately felt a little bit better for Bruce Cassidy because I felt like Bruce Cassidy like really deserved to win one. He hadn't been
Yes.
on the cup yet. Like Marchand had gotten his. I was happier for him, but this doesn't feel like, Ray Bork lifting it with the Avalanche or something like that. This is like, Marchand had his time with the Bruins. He was a dutiful servant to that team forever. And it's like, he knows the deal. And if ever like Brad Marchand and Tuukka Rask are very equipped for the criticism that they have been faced with over their careers, because I do genuinely get the sense that they do not care. And Brad Marchand has a very like kind of sarcastic approach to it, and it's like, you know, I think he could take all those things in stride. And I think, to your point, Ben, he probably knew that that was going to happen on the way out the door. But he's about to spend the summer in Florida lifting the cup. Like he's gonna be fine. And so I'm thrilled for him. I'm glad that he got the chance to do it again, and he was a great fit for that team.
Yeah, I observe hockey the way most basketball fans observe basketball, where it's like I really like players, and I'll follow them wherever they go. And I know there isn't as much movement in hockey, but like Brad Marchand is one of those guys where it's I really enjoy watching him because, like Logan said, he can be an asshole on the ice, and he whatever criticism he faces because of it, couldn't care less. Like, I'm gonna go home with my kids and my wife, and I'm gonna hang out with them, and then when I show up tomorrow, I'll deal with whatever I deal with. And the second I leave, I'm doing my own thing on my own time. So I've always enjoyed Marchand as a player and a person whenever I've interacted. And for him to join the team that he joined, like Kachuk,
It was a perfect
Sam
fit.
Bennett, it was
Perfect.
awesome. Not only from the on ice standpoint, but from the standpoint of literally, 13 months ago, whatever it was, Sam Bennett sucker punched him, gave him a concussion, knocked him out for 3 games, whatever it was, in a playoff series. He said, essentially, I would have done the same thing. That was a pretty good move by him. They took out one of the best players on the other side. I'll never forget. I was probably 2 feet away from him, and he said, "Yeah, every time I go into a series, I think about hurting somebody on the other team because it makes my team's chances better." That's Brad Marchand, and he joined the team that hurt him and took him out, and then he goes and wins the cup and sticks it to the franchise that thought they were putting the right pieces around him to create a contender, but never really, they were never really doing that. I think they were always off a little bit. The decision with the goaltenders going into this season, obviously a misstep as we've seen, and then before that, it was just never quite what they needed it to be to get over the hump of what Florida was, which is a wagon at this point. I don't think anybody can argue that. So happy for him 1,000%, and I'm happy that the narrative of when he left, the Bruins floated it. He wasn't going to sign an extension. We've had talks for months, and he didn't feel comfortable with the number that we could only afford this, even though they have whatever. Logan probably knows better than I. $20 million in cap space going into the offseason.
Yeah,
we couldn't afford it. So sorry, we had to trade him. Yeah, they didn't have to, but they did, and it was a smart hockey move on both sides. He goes and gets a cup. I'm sure he's going to re-sign with Florida and try to run it back, probably a 1-year deal, or even if he doesn't, he goes somewhere else or goes back to Boston. He won in this deal. They go and get a first-round pick. I think they probably should have gotten more for him based off the value that he had for Florida, but they get what they needed, and everybody's a winner in this one. This is one of the rare sports trades where I don't think anybody can come out thinking that they lost because they're both better off for it.
I do think there was an element of the Bruins doing right by him in this case, sending him to a contender. But there was a lot of contenders he could have been sent to. And I think it's funny that, to me, he immediately looked right in a Panthers uniform. Yeah. He immediately looked right on that roster in a way that he wouldn't have looked as perfect, in my opinion, in a Avalanche or another really good team's uniform, just because he fit there. To me, he's a Bruin, but really close behind he is a modern version of that Florida Panthers roster. And I just think everything about it was storybook, and you're right, it worked out for both sides, especially him.
When you think of this Panthers run, just real quick, I think you're going to think of Brad Marchand up there with the players that, it's Tkachuk, it's Bennett, it's Reinhart. Marchand's pretty close, and he might only end up playing, 35 games with him, whatever it was, with the postseason and regular season combined. But he's going to be up there because he just epitomizes what this group was about. And I think that's cool for him because he'll always have it in Boston. But to have it with another franchise in such a short amount of time is pretty cool.
It's thinking about this, and how well he fits in with the Panthers. Ben, I think what the conclusion I'm arriving at is that this iteration of the Panthers is what the Bruins tried to set out to be and ultimately failed to be in the aftermath of losing in 2019. The trade I always go back to that says everything about what they thought was when they 1-for-1 swapped Danton Heinen for Nick Ritchie. And Nick Ritchie, of course, was useless because he was, a once upon a time 25-point guy who was just a bruiser. But it was Danton Heinen came back last year and saved the first line for periods of time. And it was he was a responsible two-way player, but he didn't throw his weight around. And it's that's why Nikita Zadorov is here and he's going to be here for the next half a decade, is because they've tried to be we have to get bigger, we have to get stronger. They completely overcorrected. And it's the guys like Marchand who are great two-way players. And I know they obviously don't grow on trees, but it's they were so hell-bent on drafting guys like Beecher and just bruisers, and Trent Frederick. He even panned out well, but there was a certain identity that they were going for. But that's a really tough balance to strike because it's very easy to become a bad offensive team when you do that. Guys like Tkachuk, Sam Bennett, who are very physical but can also put up points, that's rare. And so I think this Panthers team kind of represents what the Bruins had set out to do, but they chose the wrong guys in the process.
The Panthers also, they took their lumps, it wasn't I think of the Warriors, it came out of nowhere. They showed up one day and they were the best team in basketball. That was not the Panthers. They've built this thing for a half a decade at least, and it took them losing in the Cup final the year before they ended up winning. Right? I'm not wrong on that. And
Yeah. Well,
so go ahead.
no, I was going to say you are right on that. And it all started with the Huberdeau trade a few years ago, which was crazy, but that was the one thing, and that set them off. That was when they really ended up kind of like hitting the stride. But for years, yeah, it was the Barkov, Ekblad, like those guys were around, but it was just they found the right pieces to complement them. And it was, Kachuk, like they invested in the right pieces.
And they stuck to what they believed in is a big. I think the Bruins, you say that path that they went down and they wanted to get more physical and bigger, but they've also kind of flip flopped on that. Where what are we? What is our identity? It was the two goaltenders for a couple of years, and that got them very far, not in the playoffs, but very far in terms of wins. And then they switched up on it because it didn't work in the postseason 2 years in a row. The Panthers didn't do that. They didn't switch what they thought their identity was going to be.
Yeah.
They stuck with goalie Bob, who I don't think anybody's going to argue that he's a top 5 goaltender anymore at this point in his career, but he's who they stuck with. They knew what to put in front of him. They knew how to make him successful, and it might have taken a little bit longer than they thought, but they eventually got there, and now it's back to back, and I don't think this thing's going to stop anytime soon for them.
Lovely. Congratulations, Brad. You think Brad will bring the cup to Boston?
No chance.
He should. He should.
They
do the Ray Bork parade.
That would be insane. It's been a while. It's been what, 12 months since the last one. So
yeah, I hope he brings it. He's right there to banners or whatever the hell that thing is called. Down there. Right by the.
I need Brad.
Bobby Orr statue.
Yeah, I need Brad Marchand working at Raising Cane's in Boston with the cup behind him and a Panthers hat on.
I think he's absolutely going to be the guy who drops the cup off the side of a boat because he's too drunk and it's in the water somewhere in some harbor in Florida.
Really? No, I see. He's always struck me as a guy who's like actually, I think on a personal level, he's a kind of a responsible, mature individual. He's a lunatic
I'm just
on
thinking
the ice.
The last time.
Yeah.
I know it was 15 years ago at this
Yeah.
point.
I was about to say, that's a little.
He was like 19 years old.
Yeah.
Well, those
I
things
would
stick
not
with
want to
you.
be judged against how I celebrated a Stanley Cup when I was 23.
What he needs to do is he needs to rap at whatever the end of the parade is, like he did in 2011. Just full circle moment. I'm gonna spit a quick 16 for you.
What I think it is kind of amazing how remember when everyone was trying to rap? Like that was such like a early 2000s, late 90s thing.
I know some
thought
people that still do.
Everyone thought that they could rap, and now it's like I feel like now is different. Everyone now thinks that they can like dance, like TikTok dance. So maybe that's the benefit that social media brought, is that it convinced white people that they can't actually rap. But now it has everyone doing, I don't know, hot to go dances. So 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
That song rips, but